I think that the reason that your work has been so influential and so moving for lots of people, including myself, is the kind of consequences of a culturally embodied imbalance that we are effectively continually strengthening because the brain is plastic. We are using the left hemispheric form of attention and then reinforcing the left hemispheric form of attention and then denigrating, dismissing right hemispheric forms of attention in ways that change fundamentally our experience of being in the world. Could you narrate just a little bit of the consequences of that for me?
Yes. Well, as you say, the left hemisphere is not to be dismissed. It's very important. It's a tool, much as it is itself interested in tools. But it's got to be, as it were, in the service of something beyond that. As Lessing said, what is the use of youth? I mean, if you just have youth, but youth for what? And if the answer is only, well, youth, there's got to be something else, like the famous goodness, beauty, and truth, the Platonic virtues. So we need it, but it needs always to be under the superintendence of the right hemisphere that sees more. And in a way, it should be acting as a functionary or something rather like a desktop computer. I resist the equation of anything to do with the brain with a computer, but in this one respect, it's slightly like that, in that it's very good at carrying out procedures rapidly, but it's not good at understanding what those procedures mean or imply. So it must take material, do a useful preparation, and then give it back to the right hemisphere, which then incorporates it into the full picture. But what happens is that, as it were, the normal passage from left to right is then from right, let me rephrase that. What happens is that the normal passage from right to left stops now at the left hemisphere and is not taken back into the right hemisphere. In other words, we think what the left hemisphere shows, once it's broken the thing down, is the reality. But having broken it down into bits, it will seem meaningless, it will seem unattractive and senseless, and it's lost all its meaning. If you take a piece of music that is profoundly moving and just turn it into a bunch of notes and perhaps catalogue all the notes and say, well, we have 37 A flats and we've got... This is not going to help you understand the piece of music because it's all in what has been lost in breaking it up into bits. Mm-hmm. It's all in what I call the betweenness, not the space between, but actually the construction of relations. And that's another thing that I can only just throw out. But I believe and argue in this book, The Matter of Things, that relations are the foundation of everything, and that things are not primary and then have to be related, but relationships are primary, and the things we call things emerge from a network of relations. Yeah. Now, if we lose sight of this, what happens is that we start to view a theory, which is extremely thin stuff, as more real than experience. We start to see the map as more real than the land in which people live that appears on the map as just a few lines. We lose all the subtle stuff, all the stuff that comes, the skills that come from experience. It's the downgrading of experience, the downgrading of one's intuitions, the downgrading of one's judgments, as though the only thing that can validate or verify anything is an argument inevitably based on things that have been isolated, decontextualized, and so forth. Because if it's not based on that, then once again, one finds oneself appealing to people's judgments and their intuitions and so on, which we're being taught to disregard to. There's a whole industry of psychologists who move around businesses making a small fortune out of telling people they shouldn't trust their intuitions. But as you know, in The Matter of Things, I have 3 whole chapters on intuition and its important place. And although it's quite true that intuitions can sometimes mislead us, as I say, there are optical illusions I can show you that you can't believe are right, but they are. But after seeing one doesn't say, well, in that case, I'm going to close my eyes from now on. I'm never going to rely on eyesight because it can sometimes deceive me. And the cases in which it can sometimes deceive you in intuition are a consequence of its being 99% right. If something is 99% right most of the time, it will not cover those very occasional things when it's not right. But to just chuck it out is to become a moron, because it's intuition that makes one intelligent. And what intelligence means is understanding. So we're making ourselves fools. We're following very black and white positions because the left hemisphere wants decision now. It doesn't want ambiguity. It doesn't like uncertainty because remember, it's the one that's grabbing. It wants to get, look, is that a seed or is it a pebble? You can't tell me it could be one or the other. I'm going to get it. And so the left hemisphere is quick and dirty. It's not the one that is more reflective, more Ramachandran, V.S. Ramachandran, very, very well-known, distinguished neuroscientist, calls the right hemisphere the devil's advocate because it's not the one that jumps to conclusions. It goes, yeah, but it might be this. Whereas the left hemisphere is jumping to conclusions all the time. So it has a quick and dirty way of thinking. It tends to put people into categories and everything into categories. So, you are what you are by virtue of being, as you started off by reflecting. I'm worse than you said. I'm not only a male, but I'm old and I'm white. Crikey, we better not listen to him. So, it's this categorization which is so heinous. And yet at the same time, we're being encouraged to think flexibly and diversely, but we're not. We're being channeled into very, very rigid, very foolish ways of thinking, and then having battles with one another over it instead of going, well, that's very interesting. You see it that way, but what would you say to this? And having a proper discussion. That's what the civilization has grown up to enable us to do. It's what education is for. And we're throwing that away, it seems to me, by our very cut and dried, simplistic decisions and ways of looking at things.